Welcome to Music Tech Explained, the visual approach. My name is Edgar Rothermich, author of the best-selling book series Graphically Enhanced Manuals. In this video, I will demonstrate how to configure the VCV Bridge Plugin in Logic Pro 10. For example, it enables you to play the VCV Rack via MIDI from inside Logic and route the audio from the VCV Rack back into your Logic project on the same channel strip, even without the need of any additional aux channel strip. In case you haven't heard of it yet, let's start with a simple question. What is VCV Rack? It is a free open source software application that simulates a modular synthesizer, like the hugely popular Eurorack. The software, available on macOS, Windows and Linux, is still in beta, currently 0.6.2c, while I'm taping this video. Despite the beta status, the software is fully functional and already has a huge user base. Last month, I released a free manual for the VCV Rack, written in the same style as my other graphically enhanced manuals. It is available as a PDF, ebook and also as a printed book on Amazon. All the links are available on my website at dingdingmusic.com/tech. On that page, you will also find some signal flow diagrams that I created for various synthesizers you might find helpful. They are also free. Just click on the link to download those PNG files. If you haven't used the VCV Rack yet, please download the manual where I explain the details on how to install the app and the important concepts of downloading and updating individual synth modules. Even if you are already familiar with the app, I still recommend browsing through the manual. There are a few hidden features that you might not know. Plus, I explain a little bit about the file structure and the different file types. In this video, I will not go into the basic operation of the VCV Rack software. I explain all that in the manual, and there are already other YouTube videos out there for that. What I want to show in this video is how to use the VCV Bridge Plugin that comes with the VCV Rack installation, especially how to configure it in Logic Pro 10. It enables you to play the VCV Rack from inside Logic, either in through mode or by playing back MIDI regions, and have the audio signal from VCV Rack routed back into Logic. You might have seen that in other videos, but now I will demonstrate how to accomplish that very simple with a single channel strip. In another example, I will show how to synchronize the VCV Rack sequencer to play along with your Logic project following the transport controls and Logic's tempo. Please keep in mind that this video is based on the beta version 0.6.2c, and the final version of the VCV Rack software might operate slightly differently. Also, I demonstrate the functionality in this video on Sierra, macOS 10.12. I ran in some issues with High Sierra and Mojave that might have been addressed in a newer update of the Rack software. Before we begin, you have to be aware of the two modes you can operate the VCV Rack, either as a standalone application or linked to a DAW using the VCV Bridge Plugin. Let me quickly illustrate those concepts on two graphics. First, the standalone mode. When you launch the VCV Rack software, it acts as a software synthesizer that requires that the following two components are properly configured: the MIDI in and the audio out. You load the MIDI module, one of the core modules of VCV Rack, to act as the MIDI interface. It has to be configured to receive MIDI data directly from any MIDI controller that is available on your computer to send the MIDI messages to the VCV Rack, where the MIDI module converts the MIDI signal into control signals that are patched to the various modules. You also load the audio module, another one of the core modules of the VCV Rack. It acts as the audio interface. It has to be configured to send the audio signal the Rack is producing directly to any of the available audio interfaces on the computer. The other operation is Bridge Mode, that allows any DAW to use the Rack application internally as a virtual plugin, although it operates externally as a separate software application. Here's a graphic that shows the various components and the routing. As you can see, the VCV Rack is not directly routed to the MIDI keyboard and the audio interface. Instead, you configure the MIDI keyboard and the audio interface in your DAW as usual. When you play your MIDI keyboard, you can record its MIDI messages in the DAW, and when playing back your DAW, it sends its audio signal to the audio interface. Now the important component is the Bridge plugin that is part of the VCV Rack installation. Once installed, it can be opened in the DAW like any other third-party plugin, either as AU standard or VST standard. The plugin functions as a handshake between the DAW and the Rack software to exchange the MIDI and audio data between the two. As you can see, the MIDI controller is connected to the DAW where its MIDI data is recorded on the selected instrument track. If the Bridge plugin is loaded on such a track, then that MIDI data on that track is sent to the Rack application, so the Rack application plays those notes. Any audio signal from the Rack software is received by the DAW through the Bridge plugin, and like any other audio signal in your DAW, it can be mixed and played back as part of the DAW project. Another advantage of the VCV Bridge plugin is that it can also send MIDI Clock to the Rack application to sync, for example, a sequencer module that is used in a VCV Rack patch. Now let me demonstrate how to set up the VCV Bridge mode when using it with Logic Pro 10. The configuration of the VCV Bridge plugin in Logic Pro 10 requires 3 steps. Step 1, the IAC Driver configuration. Step 2, the Rack configuration. And Step 3, the Logic configuration. First, Step 1, the IAC Driver configuration. Right at the beginning, there is a big exception, because Logic doesn't use the VCV Bridge plugin to send its MIDI data to the Rack application. Instead, it uses the IAC driver, a built-in MIDI device that is part of Mac OS X. In case you are not familiar with this component, here are some facts about that IAC driver. IAC is an acronym for Inter-Application Communication. It is a protocol in Mac OS that provides virtual MIDI cables that let you route MIDI messages between applications on your Mac. The individual applications don't have to support that protocol or even know about it, because Mac OS provides a special MIDI device called IAC Driver, and any application on the Mac that supports MIDI, which means it has to be core MIDI compliant, sees that device like any other connected MIDI device. The IAC driver is available in the Audio MIDI Setup utility app along with any other MIDI device available on your computer. For example, all the external MIDI keyboards and MIDI controllers that are connected to your computer. Open the Audio MIDI Setup utility app located in the Utilities folder inside the Applications folder and open its MIDI Studio window. Key command, Command 2. By default, the IAC driver provides a single virtual MIDI bus, but you can add additional buses to the driver to create multiple pipelines to transfer MIDI data between applications. Once configured, you choose one of the buses of the IAC device on the application that is sending the MIDI data, and you select the same IAC bus on the application that is receiving the MIDI data. This establishes the virtual MIDI bus between those applications, as we will see in a moment. The good news about the IAC driver is that its default configuration is all you need for the VCV Bridge, and you don't even have to open the driver. Here are the steps in case you want to double check the settings. Open the Audio MIDI Setup utility. The quickest way is to use the Spotlight search feature in Mac OS. That means you press Command Spacebar and type the first few letters of Audio MIDI Setup and press the Enter key. Under the Window menu, select Show MIDI Studio and press Command 2 to toggle that window. Once the MIDI Studio window is open, double-click the IAC driver, which opens the IAC Properties window. You could change the name of the device in the first field, toggle the checkbox to enable or disable the device, and set a color for that device. At the bottom are the available MIDI ports for that device. As a default, it only has one port called Bus 1. You can add or remove additional MIDI ports and even name those ports. These are the names that show up in your DAW when using those internal MIDI ports. For this demonstration, we leave everything at the default configuration. In the next step, we have to configure the VCV Rack software, the MIDI module and the audio module to be specific. First, the MIDI module, which has 3 fields. In the first field, you select the MIDI driver. In our case, that would be Core MIDI, the built-in driver in Mac OS. When you click on the second field, a pop-up menu opens that shows all the Core MIDI compliant MIDI devices that are connected and available on your computer. One of the MIDI devices on the menu should be IAC Driver Bus 1. That is exactly the device and MIDI port that we just saw in the Audio MIDI Setup utility. By selecting this MIDI device, IAC Driver Bus 1, your MIDI module in your VCV patch will receive MIDI messages from any application on your computer that is sending MIDI messages to this virtual MIDI port. As we will see in the next step, when configuring Logic Pro 10, we have to choose exactly that MIDI port IAC Driver Bus 1 to send MIDI from Logic to the VCV Rack. But before we do that, we have to finish the configuration in the VCV Rack and set up the audio module. The audio module also has 3 fields. We click on the first field and choose Bridge from the pop-up menu. That means the audio signal that the VCV Rack application produces is not sent to an audio interface, and instead routed internally from the VCV Rack software to the VCV Bridge plugin that is loaded on a channel strip of your DAW. When we click on the second field of the audio module, we open a pop-up menu where we can select any of 16 ports. These ports function as virtual audio buses. Remember the bus you select here, because we have to choose that exact bus on the channel strip in Logic so we can route the VCV Rack audio signal to the proper destination in Logic. Let's use the default bus 1. The other 2 fields for the sample rate and the buffer size cannot be changed because they are automatically set by the DAW that is using that port. When you click on the field, you will see the note Locked by Device. That is all the configuration on the VCV Rack. Now the MIDI module receives MIDI from the IAC driver, and the audio module sends its audio over port 1 of the VCV Bridge routing. Now to the final configuration step, Logic Pro 10. Logic has a very elegant solution that makes it possible to use only one track for sending the MIDI signal and receiving the audio signal, similar to a software instrument track, with no extra aux track as a return required. First, we create a new project with one software instrument track. That is the track that provides the 2 functions: recording the MIDI notes as MIDI regions that are sent to the Rack application, and at the same time receive the audio signal back from the Rack software. Select the instrument track and on its channel strip click on the instrument slot to open the instrument plugin menu. However, we don't select any of the instrument plugins. Instead, we scroll down to the Utilities option that opens a submenu with a special plugin called External Instrument. You can choose stereo or mono depending on how you set up your patch in the Rack application. Once the plugin is loaded, you click the blue button to open the plugin window to configure it. This plugin is used for integrating external hardware MIDI sound modules in your Logic project by sending the MIDI message to the MIDI device the sound module is connected to in the MIDI destination, and selecting the audio input where the audio out of the sound module is connected to, the input. Here's how we set it up for the VCV Rack. When you click on the MIDI destination selector, you will see all the MIDI devices in the pop-up menu that are available on your computer. And as you can see, we also have the IAC Driver Bus 1 option, and that is exactly what we want to select. That means any MIDI messages on that track, either when playing back a MIDI region on that track or playing the track live when the track is selected, will be routed to the MIDI module on the rack application via this internal virtual IAC MIDI cable. The input selector is usually the place where you choose a channel of the external audio interface where the audio signal of the external MIDI sound module is routed back into the software instrument channel strip. However, the audio signal of the rack software that functions as the MIDI sound module in our case won't come back on the audio interface, and instead coming back through the VCV Bridge plugin. That's why we can ignore that input menu here and instead configure the audio return in the next section. Now that we established the virtual pipeline to route MIDI messages from the software instrument track in Logic to the MIDI module in the rack application, we have to establish the second pipeline to route the audio from the audio module of the rack application back to the software instrument track where the MIDI was coming from. And for that, we use the VCV Bridge plugin that you hopefully had installed when you downloaded the rack software. Please see the chapter at the beginning of my book where I explain all that. To load the plugin, click on the first audio effects slot on the software instrument channel strip to open the plugin menu. Scroll all the way down to the audio units folder, and in that submenu, you should see the menu item VCV, a folder that contains the VCV Bridge plugin. Select it, mono or stereo, depending on your rack patch, to load that plugin. Once the VCV Bridge plugin is loaded on the first audio effects slot, click on that blue plugin button to open its plugin window. The first selector, labeled Port, opens a pop-up menu where you can select the port 1 to 16. Because earlier we set the audio module on the rack application to port 1, we also have to set the plugin to port 1. So it receives the audio signal from that audio module of the rack software. And here's how it all comes together. I play my MIDI keyboard and the MIDI signal is sent to the VCV rack. Or I can play back a MIDI region on the track and that MIDI data is sent to the VCV rack. The audio of the VCV rack playing those notes is coming back on that same instrument track, and I can add audio effects or use MIDI effects the same way as if I would have a regular instrument plugin loaded on that track. In the previous example, the VCV Rack plays live, like an instrument plugin that you have loaded in Logic. Here's a setup if you want to record the audio signal from the VCV Rack as an audio region, which is useful if you perform on your modules while playing back, for example filter sweeps, or if you collaborate on that project with someone that doesn't have VCV Rack available. In the standard setup, the audio signal of the VCV Rack arrives through the VCV Bridge plugin on an instrument channel strip, and that audio signal is routed through the output slot to the main output bus called the stereo out. Now the setup requires 3 easy changes. Step 1. You create a new audio track to record the VCV Rack 2. Step 2. On its corresponding audio channel strip, you click on the input slot to select any of Logic's internal buses, for example bus 10. That means that audio track records any audio signal that is sent to that internal bus, bus 10. Now in step 3, you route the audio signal of the instrument channel strip that receives the audio signal from the VCV rack to exactly that internal bus, bus 10, by right-clicking on the output slot of that channel strip and selecting bus 10. Now you have to enable input monitoring on the audio track to listen through that audio track. If you record enable that audio track, you can record that audio signal from the VCV rack as an audio region on that audio track. Please note that you can use this setup to record the audio signal from the VCV rack while playing through Logic via the IAC driver, or you can play the VCV rack directly. That means selecting a MIDI keyboard on the MIDI module of the VCV rack and only use the VCV bridge to route the audio signal into Logic. In this section, I demonstrate how to synchronize the sequencer module in the VCV rack with Logic so it plays in sync with your other tracks in your Logic project. To synchronize the VCV rack to your Logic project means that the sequencer module in the VCV rack follows the tempo of your Logic project. For that, we use a feature called MIDI Clock that is part of the MIDI specifications. In our setup, Logic will be the master that generates and sends out the MIDI clock, and the sequencer module of the VCV rack will be the slave that will receive the MIDI clock and follows it accordingly. There are 3 steps for the configuration. Step 1. You have to tell Logic to send out MIDI clock. That setting is done in the project settings. Open the project settings window with the key command Option P and click on the Synchronization tab. Once you are on the Synchronization pane, you click on the MIDI tab that shows all the MIDI related synchronization settings. Logic allows you to choose 2 destinations to send the MIDI clock to. A destination is a specific MIDI device you send the MIDI signal through. You enable the checkbox for destination 1 and click on the selector below. It opens a pop-up menu with all the available MIDI devices on your computer. We choose the IAC Driver bus 1 again to use the virtual MIDI cable in macOS to send the MIDI clock to the VCV rack. You can leave the other parameters at their default values or adjust them as needed for your specific needs. In step 2, we have to configure the recipient of the MIDI clock, which is the VCV rack. The MIDI module has 2 output jacks labeled clock 1 and clock 2. This is where the MIDI clock comes out depending on the following 2 parameters. First, make sure that the MIDI module is set to core MIDI and IAC Driver bus 1, the same virtual MIDI cable Logic is now using to send the MIDI clock to. The second setting is a little bit hidden. When you right-click on the background of the MIDI module, the contextual menu opens with 2 additional options at the bottom to set the rate for the clock signal that comes out on those 2 output jacks. This determines the musical value, the length, each step of the sequencer in relation to the pulse of the MIDI clock. Now in step 3, you have to adjust the patch cables. Patch the cable from the clock 1 output jack of the MIDI module to the external clock input jack of the sequencer module. Now when you enable the sequencer by clicking the Run button, so it turns green, the sequencer will not start. It is only on standby mode and only starts playing when receiving a MIDI clock signal from Logic. That means whenever you start Logic, the MIDI clock is sent, and whenever you stop the project, that MIDI clock stops and stops the sequencer. Make sure to click the reset button on the sequencer before starting Logic. Okay, that sums it up about my demonstration of the VCV Rack in Logic Pro 10. Have fun playing with it and make sure to further explore this amazing app and its great community of virtual synth enthusiasts. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe to my